And sit with your back straight. Back straight, head straight. Bring your attention to the present moment, especially to the sense of being seated. How do you know that you are seated? You're not standing, walking, or lying down. It's because of the many sensations in your body. You can sense your buttocks in contact with your seat. Your feet in contact with the floor, your limbs touching one another, your skin in contact with your skin in the air around you. Your breathing, your back supporting your body. The muscles in your body. There are many sensations, but you don't have to zoom in on only one particular one. Just be conscious of the general sense of being seated. And while you are aware of bodily sensations, try to relax if you can. If you can't relax, it's okay. Move on to another sensation. While you're trying to be conscious of the sense of being seated, you can also be aware that you're hearing my voice, the sound of the aircon, or any other sound. If your eyes are open, you can also be aware of seeing. Thoughts may come and go. Don't try to push them away. Don't follow them. Don't ignore them. Acknowledge them and let them go by coming back to your senses. Sensing the body, hearing or seeing. I hope you've settled your mind and you're calmer and clearer now to absorb what I'm going to say today. The title of today's talk in the brochure is very long. I would have shortened it, but because I was involved in conducting workshops and meditation retreats these few months, somehow it slipped my mind. Essentially, what I'm going to talk about today is the core teachings of the Buddha. We have so many different schools, sects and denominations of Buddhism nowadays. It can be very bewildering for someone who is searching the truth, as it was for me. Way back in the mid-70s, when I was searching for truth, I looked not only in Buddhism, but also in other faiths. I read the Bhagavad Gita, the Jing, the Bible, especially the New Testament, Sufism, and other forms of mysticism and meditative or spiritual practices. When it came to Buddhism, it was very confusing. So many different schools. But luckily, I was introduced to one particular school, which is called Zen Buddhism. And in those days, there were very few books in English available on Zen. That was back in the mid-70s. And this one book called The Way of Zen by Alan Watts was introduced to me when I was in my third year in university in USM, Penang. And that book really changed my life. And that book also talked about the essentials of Buddhism from the point of view of Zen. And basically it talked about the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, the way that Zen interpreted it. That book changed my life in the sense that before that I was looking to find the truth in terms of intellectual understanding, also reading up on Western philosophy. And it was only after my introduction to this book that I began to realize that in order for the truth to be realized, it has to be beyond the intellect. So that's why from that time on I went searching for more non-intellectual ways of understanding truth. In any case, the logic of Buddhism appealed to me, and I chose the path of Buddhism instead. Actually, I wanted to become a Zen monk. I wanted to live up to the ideal of the Zen monk living alone in the mountainside, self-sustained, cultivating his own veggies, painting and writing poetry, and meditating. But I was not a calligrapher. I didn't know Chinese. I didn't know Japanese. So I couldn't find a Zen master be my mentor. And Zen, as you all know, is supposed to be something that is very mysterious and mystical. And one of the opening words of the book that I read is, "The way that can be named is not the true way." I think that comes from Tao Te Ching. Zen is supposed to be something which is non-institutional, and you cannot write about Zen, although there are many writings about it. You just practice it. So at first, without any instruction from any competent teacher, I just followed the book. He said, sit quietly and don't do anything. When you sit, just sit. When you walk, just walk. When you eat, just eat. Simpler said than done, correct? How do you do it? For a long time I tried to sit quietly, but I could not do nothing. My mind was always thinking of something, and I could hardly sit for more than 5 minutes. Later that somebody introduced me to Malaysian Buddhist Meditation Center, where a form of meditation was taught based on the tradition of Mahasi Sayadaw, rising and falling, that sort of thing. So when I read the book, I was very impressed. I thought, hey, this is what Zen is all about. It's just that it's more systematic and very well structured. There was the sort of route that I had to take. Since I couldn't find someone, Zen master, to be my mentor, I decided to become a Theravada monk. Some years ago, someone asked me to write an article with the title that is somewhat close to our topic today. It is an article meant to be inserted in a volume called One Dharma that was compiled in honor of our late Chief Reverend Dr. K. Sri Dhammananda. And the title of that article is Dhamma Everywhere, Dhamma Here and There. It's interesting that the word Dhamma has got a very general meaning, which is equivalent to the English word thing, T-H-I-N-G. So it can mean anything. On the other hand, it has more specific meanings like the truth, righteousness, the law of nature, and it also means the teachings of a religious teacher. In fact, during the Buddha's time, in the Pali scriptures, the teachings of other spiritual teachers were also called Dhamma Vinaya. Dhamma means, normally we translate it as doctrine, and Vinaya means discipline. Dhamma Vinaya is a word that is not confined to Buddhist usage. It was used for all religious teachings during the Buddha's time. But nowadays the word Dhamma seems to be monopolized by the Buddhists to mean the teachings of the Buddha. When we look at the word Dharma, it has a wider meaning. It means the truth, it means the law of nature, and the Buddha's teachings also talk about the law of nature. So you could say that there is an overlap. Dhamma could be the law of nature, the Dhamma or the teachings of the Buddha tells us about this law of nature and what it's all about and how to practice accordingly. All schools of Buddhism are called such because they believe in the Buddha. Buddhism comes from the word Buddha. But Christmas Humphreys, one of the founders of the Buddhist Society in UK, wrote in one of his early books that the Buddha did not teach Buddhism. The ism came later. The Buddha just taught the truth. He taught the Dhamma. And the word Buddhism came about very much later when Christian missionaries tried to label the non-Christian religions. All the ism, Hinduism and so forth, and Buddhism, Taoism, and all the ism came in. In fact, Buddhists don't call themselves Buddhists in traditional Buddhist cultures. In Burma, they are called Samaditi, people with the right view. You don't call yourself Buddhist, you call yourself one who has the right view. By definition, nowadays all schools and sect denominations of Buddhism are agreed on one thing, that they are all disciples of the Buddha. And what does the word Buddha mean? The word Buddha means awakened or enlightened. In this so-called Theravada Buddhism, the school of Buddhism that takes the Pali Canon as its main source of authority, there is only one Buddha, and that is Sakyamuni Buddha or Gautama Buddha. One Buddha in the sense that there was the Buddha of whom we are the disciples. In the early Pali scriptures, there was mention only of 7 Buddhas, and our Gautama Buddha is number 7th, number 8th will be Mitteya Buddha. When we take refuge nowadays, I think all the other Buddhist schools also take refuge. They take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. But who is this Buddha that they take refuge in? Do they actually take refuge in Sakyamuni Buddha? Or do they take refuge in Amitabha Buddha or any other Buddhas? Because in non-Theravadan schools of Buddhism, there are many, many Buddhas, what they call transcendental Buddhas, and they are not the historical Sakyamuni Buddha. No matter how many Buddhas one to believe in, all of them stem from Sakyamuni Buddha himself. Because in the non-Theravada Buddhist schools, the other Buddhas, other than Sakyamuni Buddha, were introduced by Sakyamuni Buddha in their sutras. That is to give authenticity to their new Buddhas. In any case, whether it's the historical Buddha, a self-awakened human being, or whether it's some other Buddha, transcendental or otherwise, all the other Buddhas came about because the historical self-awakened Buddha introduced them to mankind. We should look back at the historical Buddha. Why was he called a Buddha? Why is one called a Buddha in the first place? One is awakened. Awakened to what? Awakened to the Four Noble Truths. And whatever Dhamma that we have now, whether it is from the Pali Canon or whether it's from the Agamas, the Pali of Tibetan or Chinese sources, all of them stem from the Dhamma that the Buddha realized to become one. If the Buddha had not realized the Four Noble Truths by himself, there would not have been any Buddhism, let alone Buddhist schools or sects or denominations. So when we talk about taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the Buddha means the one who was self-awakened to the Four Noble Truths. And the Dhamma means the teachings that came out of the realization of the Four Noble Truths. And who is the Sangha? During the Buddha's time, during Sakyamuni Buddha's time, there were no books, nor were there any inscriptions on rocks and so forth. Like the Vedas, the teachings of the Buddha were transmitted orally from one generation to another. And that was done for about 500 years before it was first put into writing. Who were the people who transmitted these teachings? The members of the Sangha, the monks. Perhaps it was a patriarchal society that recorded the teachings and the history of Buddhism in the early days. Because there's hardly any mention of bhikkhunis helping to transmit the Dhamma, only the Bhikkhu Sangha. And very interestingly, in the Pali scriptures, when one takes refuge in Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Bhikkhu Sangha, very specifically Bhikkhu Sangha, not the Bhikkhuni Sangha, it is precisely because it was the monks, the bhikkhus, who transmitted the teachings orally over 2 millennium that we are able to know what the Buddha taught. If the monks had not transmitted it, if for the 500 years they had just done their own thing, all go to the forest and just meditated and become arahants, and they don't bother to transmit the teachings because that's a different department altogether. If you spend a lot of time memorizing the teachings and then teaching it to your disciples, that will take a lot of time from meditation. It's a good thing that there was this dichotomy of duties even during the Buddha's time. There were monks who were interested in the intellectual aspects of the Dhamma, and they dedicated themselves to preserving the teachings of the Buddha by memorizing them and teaching them to their students from generation to generation. On the other hand, there's also another group of monks who were more interested in spiritual development. They learned the teachings and they practiced and they got out of suffering. They became liberated. They were not interested in transmitting the teachings. Then probably there's another third group of monks which is more ambidextrous. They study and they practice, and they do both. We should be grateful to these sort of monks because not only do they know the theory, they know also how to put it into practice. Because if you just study without practice, it can lead to over-intellectualization, over-theorization, and not being practical about the theory of the Dhamma. In any case, in whatever Buddhist schools, Buddhist school or sect or denomination that you belong to, basically we take refuge in the same things. The Buddha, the one who was self-awakened to the Four Noble Truths, and the Dhamma, the teachings that came out of his realization of the Four Noble Truths, which include the Noble Eightfold Path that leads you to the same understanding that the Buddha himself attained. But it's not only that, not only the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, but because of his realization and his purity, he was able to access other types of knowledges, other types of information that may not necessarily lead to liberation, but which are helpful in guiding people who are not ready for liberation to fare well while they sojourn in samsara. The Sangha that you paid respect to just now, the well-practiced Sangha and so forth, that is not the Sangha that we take refuge in. That is the Sangha that we pay homage to, that we gain inspiration from. Because these are the noble ones, these are the ones who are awakened, the 4 pairs of individuals, the 4 pairs and the 8 types of individuals. These are the enlightened ones, the awakened ones, and they did not necessarily be in the robes. They could be lay people, but they are worthy of homage, they are worthy of veneration, they are worthy of hospitality. They are the incomparable field of merits in the world. Not necessarily monks who just wear robes and who are not enlightened. Actually, this formula for paying homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha that you recited just now is quite alien to the Pali Canon. In the Pali Canon, nowhere is it mentioned that anyone pays homage to the Sangha in that way that you did. What they would do is that they would reflect these are the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha, not to pay homage to. Anyway, coming back to the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha. To be a Buddhist, it is agreed among all Buddhist schools, one has to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha. And I just told you what these three are, these three objects. The Buddha is the one who, self-awakened historical person, human being, who discovered and realized the Four Noble Truths. The Dhamma is the teachings that came out of this realization of the Four Noble Truths, which includes the way to attain the same type of liberation that the Buddha attained, as well as other ways that can help a person who is not yet ready for liberation to sojourn well in samsara. And then the Sangha, of course, not the enlightened members, because you may be an enlightened layperson, but you do not preserve the teachings. Now we take refuge in the Sangha that preserve the teachings, because without them we would not know what the teachings are. Even now, because the robed members of the Sangha have all the time to dedicate to the study and practice of the Dhamma, they will be the experts in the Dhamma compared to lay people, unless you are a Buddhist scholar. If you are just a lay person having to take care of your own family and earn a living, you will be too busy to pay much attention to the Buddhist scriptures, to study them in detail, not to mention propagating them. So coming back to the core teachings of the Buddha, it is amazing that after so many years, according to our traditional reckonings, more than 2,500 years after the Buddha had passed away, there is such a divergence of Buddhist schools and denominations, yet there is some core elements that are similar to all schools of Buddhism. If you look at the history of how Buddhism spread from India, in those times communications was pretty poor. I think some of you went on a Silk Route recently, and you will know how difficult it is to travel across the deserts and the mountains to get from India to China. No telecommunications, and the only source of information anybody would have in any locality would be the monk, the expert. The expert is the one that will be telling the people, okay, this is the Buddha Dhamma. And he will be telling the people what he understood to be the Buddha Dhamma. I'm sure there are 100 over people here. After the end of this talk, and each of you goes out and tells what I spoke about, it will be quite different. Different people will have different impressions of what is said. Correct? And another thing is that in the early days, all these were transmitted by rote, orally, no written form. I'm sure that all of you, when you were young, or there are some young people here, you might have played a game in your youth camps where first person is given a sentence to read, and then he memorizes it, and then he passes what he has memorized to the next person. By the time it comes to the end of the queue, the message would have been very distorted, right? But luckily, they were smart enough not to just base on individuals. They had what they call a mass recitation. When you have a mass recitation, you cannot go wrong. If somebody goes wrong out of tune or out of sync, then everybody will notice it. We have this Sanggayana or Sanggiti. Sanggiti literally means choral singing, choral chanting. Actually, the first Sangiti, or the first so-called council, was the first choral singing or chanting of the Buddha's words. When you try to transmit something orally, you cannot memorize exactly word for word what the Buddha said. Imagine now I'm giving you a 1 hour talk. If you try to memorize word for word what I say, you won't get very far. What they would do is they would get the gist of what the Buddha said, and then they would try to stylize it into stock phrases. That's why nowadays we have this stock phrase that you recited just now. Itipiso bhagava arahang swakhato bhagavata dhammo. This is a stock phrase. So when you see itipiso, then you put a dot, etc., and you end with. So it's the same thing when you want to transmit teachings of the Buddha, they would look for all these stock phrases and then it's easy to transmit. What we have now in whatever schools, whether it's Pali or Sanskrit or Chinese or Tibetan or Gandhari or whatever, they are not the exact words of the Buddha. They are the edited and what you call preset accounts of the Buddha's teachings, summaries of the Buddha's teachings. What happened was in those days, when Buddhism spread from India to Sri Lanka, to Burma, to China, and to Southeast Asia, they came through monks, and these were the people, the experts who taught the Dhamma. If they had different interpretations, of course they would develop a school with a different interpretation, because everything is based on what this monk says. Nobody else could challenge him because they don't have the resources to do so. And because the Buddha was a linguist, he taught in different dialects as he walked from one village to another. Those times, no mass transport. Even though bullock carts and chariots were available, monks were not allowed to travel on a vehicle unless he was sick. Healthy monks traveled by walking. The Buddha walked from village to village to village and preached, and he preached according to the dialect of the village. Imagine when the Buddha passed away and they had their first choral chanting, the first so-called council, and all the monks came together. You think it would be easy to decide which dialect we shall use to preserve the teachings? Imagine like in China, the Hokkien people will say, I want it in Hokkien, the Cantonese will say, I want it in Cantonese, the Teochew will say, I want it in Teochew. The same when in India, at that time, the bhikkhus were all from different states and different localities. They memorized the teachings in various ways. Although Asma Ananda was supposed to have memorized everything according to what the scriptures tell us, it doesn't seem that it was so. Because if you look at the way, the phrasing or the language of the different suttas, they are not all the same. They are different style. What has happened is that it took many years for the monks to decide on a common dialect to use to preserve the teachings. And in the process also, there was some editing going on, how to classify which suttas and put where, in which Nikaya, and so forth. What we have now, we call it the Pali. Pali does not mean language. Pali means the text. We call it Pali language. And actually it's close to Magadhi. Magadhi is the dialect that was used in Magadha, King Bimbisara's kingdom at that time. But there was only one district that the Buddha stayed, although he stayed in Savatthi most of the time. He also went to other places. I think Rajagaha was King Bimbisara's place. He stayed in Savatthi and Rajagaha, but there were two different districts, different countries in fact. One was in Kosala, one was in Magadha. So it was close to Magadhi because nowadays when they look at the inscriptions of Asoka's pillars, they cannot see any word That's exactly the same as what we have in the Pali Canon. But there are some similarities. What scholars have come to agree upon is that the so-called Pali language that we have now, in which the Pali Canon is preserved, is not a real language that was spoken during the Buddha's time. In fact, it is a composite mixture of different dialects pieced together. Despite the fact that the Pali Canon is one rendition, one recension, and then we have the hybrid Sanskrit, which is another recension, and then we have the translation from the Sanskrit into the Chinese, the Agamas. They're different. There's a striking similarity in the core teachings of the Buddha. All these teachings, even though come from different dialects, different languages, different scripts, they all agree on the Four Noble Truths. They all agree on the Noble Eightfold Path. They all agree on the 37 factors of enlightenment, or 37 wings of awakening. The 37 wings of awakening, Bodhipakkhya Dhamma, that term itself cannot be found in the Pali scriptures, cannot be found in the Pali Suttas. But it is a convenient way of referring to this group of classification of teachings that the Buddha repeated many times in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. Before he passed away, he kept on repeating these teachings. So it seems that these are the core teachings of the Buddha, and these can be found in every school. Looking at all the differences that we have now in different schools, the way we dress, the way we carry out our rites and rituals and ceremonies, if you understand the evolution of Buddhism, you can appreciate that these things were inevitable. Because when Buddhism spread to different cultures, it had to adapt to the culture in order to be accepted by the people. One of the reasons given, I was told, why the monks in China don't go begging for alms is because of the culture in China. It was considered very low class for monks to go for alms, for one thing, and therefore I think they were decreed by the emperor that the monks should not go for alms round. And somehow they ended up cultivating and cooking their own food. Secondly, because the weather was so cold in China, they also ate in afternoon, in the evening. In some monasteries, they don't call that food, they call it eating medicine. Maybe there's some similarity in eating dark chocolates as a form of medicine for cold regions, or even eat cheese, I don't know. If we put aside all this richness in diversity due to cultural influence, we can still find the core teachings of the Buddha. Four Noble Truths, Noble Eightfold Path, that's all. Essentially, that is all. The other things, the 37 wings of awakening, they overlap in many ways, and they also include these on the Noble Eightfold Path. Whatever school of Buddhism that you belong to, if you understand the Four Noble Truths and try to put it into practice, or try to realize it in your daily life, then you cannot go wrong. You are definitely following the Buddhist path. Different people might have different traditions, or even different teachers might have different ways of interpreting the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the fourth Noble Truth. But the first two Noble Truths are all unanimous about the first two Noble Truths. One time, the Buddha was approached by a bhikkhu, and this bhikkhu sort of demanded that the Buddha told him about the beginning of the world, how this world started, or else he would disrobe. So he was giving an ultimatum to the Buddha. And then the Buddha told him, don't worry about all these things. I only teach one thing. I only teach suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering. But having said that, and before going into more detail about that, I earlier mentioned that the teachings, the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, evolved or arose out of the Buddha's realization of the Four Noble Truths. His loftiest teachings was to guide beings, or his disciples, those who are ready to be instructed, along the Noble Eightfold Path, that they can realize the same liberation that he himself realized. That is his loftiest goal. And in fact, that was his standard for his robed disciples. For his robed disciples, for his monks and nuns, he was very uncompromising. Attain liberation in this very life. That's all. He will not tell you to attain the first stage and then enjoy yourself first before you go on to the second or third stage. For him, is do it here and now. But you just try your best. If you can't do it, then you have to carry on the next life. But the aim is to do it in this very life. I also said that the Buddha was compassionate enough to teach other ways other than the Noble Eightfold Path to help people who were not yet ready for full liberation, meaning lay people. He had two sets of values. One set of value for his monks, which is practice Sila Samadhi Panya, get liberated in this very life, become an arhat in this very life. For lay people, he would say, do dana, practice your sila, so that you can listen to Dhamma talk, to guide you so that you can live well and fare well while you sojourn in samsara. So there are actually two different sets of values. The Anguttara Nikaya is full of many small suttas which give advice to the lay people. How to conduct yourself in relation to one another, depending on your relationship, and various ways of how to make a living. Now, these are all worldly stuff that are meant for lay people. The sort of advice given to lay people would probably be similar in other traditions as well, but I can only guess because I've not really studied them. But when it comes to the Dhamma in the ultimate sense, what you recited just now, the Dhamma is to be personally realized. It is timeless. It leads inwards, and so forth. And 6 qualities of the Dhamma. The Buddha was asked about this several times, and he answered the question a bit differently to different people. Let me go through some of them. The question he was asked in several suttas by someone is this: in what way, Bhante, is the Dhamma directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, inward bound, to be personally experienced by the wise? In one sutta called the Patama Sandittika Sutta in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of 6, Sutta number 47, the Buddha replied to the wandering ascetic, Molliya Sivaka. He said, if you thus know of the greed, hatred or delusion present in you, that it is there, and when greed, hatred or delusion is absent, that it is absent, that is the way the Dhamma is directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, inward bound, to be personally experienced by the wise. What he's saying is that if you can really watch your own mind and understand when there is greed, hatred and delusion, that it is there, then you are seeing the Dhamma. When you can realize that there is no greed, no hatred, no delusion in your mind, that is also seeing the Dhamma here and now. Isn't that simple? You want to realize the Dhamma, just look inwards. Look at your own mind. In Dutiya Sandittika Sutta, AN 6.48, the next one. The Buddha gave the same answer to a certain Brahmin, but he changed greed, hatred and delusion to something else. He said, if you thus know of the bodily defilement, verbal defilement or mental defilement present in you when it is there, and absent when it is not there, then that is the way the Dhamma is directly visible, etc. Then in another sutta, in the Upavana Sandittika Sutta, in Samyutta Nikaya 35.70, the Buddha told Asma Upavana that if a bhikkhu knows the presence or absence of lust within himself for any of the six sense objects, then the Dhamma is directly visible, etc. In this particular sutta, Upavana Sandittika Sutta, the Buddha only talked about one instead of three. Instead of greed, hatred and delusion, he just talked about lust. Maybe because this monk is a lustful monk and lust occurs very often in him. Just whenever there's lust in you, know that it's there. When it's not there, know that it's not there. And he talks in terms of the six senses. Whenever you see, hear, smell, taste, sense with your body, or have any thoughts in your mind, is it accompanied by lust or not? If it is or it is not and you are aware, then you are seeing the Dhamma. It's not that difficult, right? Then in another sutta, Anyatra Brahmana Sutta, AN Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Trees, Sutta number 54, the Buddha answered a certain Brahmin when he was asked the same question. He said, if lust, hatred and delusion have been abandoned, one neither plans for the harm of oneself, others, or both. One does not experience suffering and grief in the mind. One does not misbehave through body, speech and mind. And one understands, as it really is, what is good for oneself, others, and both. In this way is the Dhamma directly visible, etc. So this is another way of how you can realize the Dhamma. This is talking about the other consequences. If greed, hatred and delusion have already been totally eradicated, then you will never do any harm to yourself or to others. And you will know what is really beneficial for yourself and for others. Because even though we may be doing a lot of social welfare activities out of goodwill, if you are not totally free from greed, hatred and delusion, there's always some element of greed, hatred and delusion involved in your undertakings. Sometimes it is out of pride. You want to outshine another society. You want the honor. You want the joy. These are also motivated by greed. Unless you are totally freed from greed, hatred and delusion, whatever apparently selfless acts of kindness or welfare that you do may be tinged by some subtle defilements, which you may not even be aware. Even when people give Dhamma talks, Dhamma preachers, they may be motivated by fame. They may also be motivated by the pleasure of seeing people appreciating their talks. That is also a form of greed, wanting something in return. The pleasure, satisfaction. The whole world is actually driven by craving, satisfaction, wanting. I often tell people, if you can do what you like, that's great. If not, you better like what you do, or you'll suffer. Correct? If you're doing a job which you don't like, and every day you grumble, but you like the salary, you don't like the job, who is suffering? You're suffering, right? But you may be doing something which you like very much, but it may not bring you a lot of money, but you get a lot of satisfaction. That's a lucky person to be able to follow his vocation. In one other sutta called the Mahatana Sankhaya Sutta, MN 38, the Buddha talked about the law of dependent origination. After he talked about that, and he saw that the monks realized what he was saying, then he said that when the law of dependent origination is known, seen and understood by one, that is the Dhamma that is directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, inward bound, to be personally experienced by the wise. So this is a higher form. Knowing that when there's lust, It's simple, right? Understanding the paticca samuppada, the law of dependent origination, is something more profound. Not so easy. It's looking at cause and conditioning. Knowing that there's great hatred and delusion when it's there, and knowing when it's not there, is simpler. It's just acknowledgement of what your mental state is. Though it sounds easy, many people are not aware. Many people who don't practice mindfulness are not aware when they have lust, when they have anger, when they are deluded. Especially when you are deluded, you wouldn't know anything. If you knew that you were deluded, you are not deluded. The moment you realize, oh, there's delusion, then there's wisdom at that moment. That's why one of my teachers, Sayadaw Tejaniya, always say, you must always try to be aware, even when you're not aware. When you're aware that you're not aware, then at that moment you really have wisdom. Yeah, it's wisdom. The Buddha says, if there's lust and you know you have lust, if there's delusion and you know you have delusion, if there's anger and you know there's anger, then that is a Dhamma that is seen, that is visible here and now. This is even more important, or even more inspiring and encouraging for people. This is one sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya called Attinukho Pariyaya Sutta. Is there a way? Sutta. Is there a method? To give you a summary of the sutta, one day the Buddha asked the monks, is there a method by means of which a bhikkhu, apart from faith, fancy, oral tradition, theorizing, considered acceptance of a view, can declare final knowledge in this way? Final knowledge means arahantship. Birth is destroyed, the holy life is lived, the task is done. There is nothing further for the sake of this so-called state. What I mentioned there is a set of 5. Normally, we accept things because of 5 grounds. 1, out of faith. 2, because we like it. 3, because of oral tradition. 4th, because of theorizing. And 5th, because of considered acceptance of a view. Let me explain. For example, as Buddhists, you all believe in past lives and future lives. Why do you believe so? Can you prove it? Cannot prove, but you believe. This is acceptance out of faith, because the Buddha said so. Buddha says so, then it must be simply out of faith. There are people who are very devoted. I'm sure that there are more Buddhist devotees than there are Buddhist intellectuals. Yeah, people will just go to the temple, see the Buddha image, pray, chak kui ki hiao, pray, and then go home. Finish. I've done my job. Or if there are problems, you go to the Buddha and start to pray and ask the Buddha to help. Right? This is a very normal practice among Buddhists, or people who call themselves Buddhists. This is pure faith. You accept out of pure faith. Well, another thing could be, for example, you are sick, you go to see a doctor. The doctor diagnoses you, gives you a prescription. You go to the pharmacy, you buy the drugs, and you come home and eat those drugs. Why? Faith, right? You have faith in the doctor, you have faith in the pharmacy. You have faith, you believe that he is a competent doctor, and you believe also that the pharmacy is not going to cheat you, giving you the right, genuine drugs. And you have faith in both the doctor and the pharmacy. You come back and you eat the medicine. So this is also based on faith. You accept something based on faith. What the Buddha is trying to say is that, is there a method by which one can practice and become an arahant which is not based on faith, God or not? Or it is not even based on fancy. Not because you like, oh, this doctor looks handsome, or just because you like him, you can get his medicine and eat it. It's not because just you like it. Nor is it because of oral tradition. Oral tradition is like, we Chinese have got a lot of traditions. Every time when it comes to Qingbing, I don't know about Singapore. Singapore is getting more and more modern. People don't keep ashes of the dead anymore. No more Sinjubai. But like in Malaysia or the more old-fashioned Chinese families, we still have this practice. We just do it because it's part of tradition. We accept it because of tradition. Although some of you might not do these things, there are also other Chinese traditions which you follow. For example, Chinese New Year. Chinese New Year, everybody go and 拜家. This is a tradition. Why should you go and pai jia? You accept it because it is a tradition. So you accept things because of tradition. I think many people grew up as nominal Buddhists. When I was young, when I have forms to fill, I always say I'm a Buddhist, but I don't know who I am. I just don't really know what Buddhism is until much later in my life. We accept things out of tradition. The fourth thing is theorizing. You might be an intellectual. You might not be so devoted. You might not have so much faith, but you're a thinker. You like to think. When something happens, then you like to theorize. You have your own theory about how this thing happened. And then you hold on to it and believe it. For example, MH370. And then nobody has come up with any solution, nobody has come up with any answer, and you are an intellectual, you are a thinker, you have your own theory, and you say, that must be the way, no other way, nobody else can come up with any other theory. This must be the correct one. So if you're a thinker, you can come up with your own theory. To share with you one experience of a meditator. This meditator in Taiping, she started to learn meditation from me many years ago when I first started to teach meditation in Taiping. That was back in 1999 or 2000, around there. At that time I was just teaching rising and falling. And she had very good samadhi. And then very often she would do rising and falling and then go into this samadhi state. She would have a lot of visions and see things twirling around, visions changing. After that, she stopped meditating for many years. She didn't come for any meditation retreat, but she did her own meditation regularly at home. Recently, there was just this year, it's about 16 years later, she came to my retreat. And this time, I was teaching open awareness. Very different from what I taught last time. This time, she reported to me about her experiences. She said when she practiced, it's very difficult for her to open her eyes because the moment she opened her eyes, it's so distracting. If you start off with this sort of samatha practice, you get stuck there for a long time. And it was very difficult for her. But she told me of her experience when her eyes were closed. When eyes were closed, she said, when there's good samadhi, then she will see things twirling around, things changing, shapes and all that. And then she will come up with her own theory of how things happen. Oh, so I say you're going to start your own religion. Because she doesn't read much and she just practices. She's a regular practicer and she's a bit semi-psychic also. She can sense things around, sense spirits and energy. After she came to my recent retreat, she said, thank goodness I came to this retreat because before that I have never been looking at my mind to see cause and conditioning. I was getting caught up in all these video things going on in my mind. This is one thing, if you're a thinker, you can come up with your own theories and you hang on to them and believe them. Accept them as though they were true. You may not be a thinker, you may not be such a great thinker, but you're also a skeptic. You don't simply believe out of faith. You don't simply accept things because of tradition. But you are intelligent and you listen to somebody else's theory and this guy explains it very well, very logical, and you accept it. This is the fifth way. To repeat the 5 ways, the first is by faith. Second is because you like it, by fancy. Third is because of tradition, oral tradition. Fourth is because you're a thinker, you're a theorizer, you theorize your own theory. And the fifth is you accept somebody else's theory. These are the 5 ways, or the 5 grounds upon which we accept things. The Buddha asked the monks, apart from these 5 things, is there any other way by which a person can practice and become an arahant? Most of us, when we read the suttas, we believe that this is the Buddha's words. We believe that this is what the Buddha said, even though it may not be exactly his words. This is the essence of what he said. And we try to follow the sutta. So this is doing it out of faith, we believe. But the Buddha says here, apart from faith, if you don't believe the suttas, you don't exactly like any particular sutta, you don't simply accept it because of its tradition, you don't theorize about how to practice. Is there any method by which, apart from these 5 grounds, one can practice and become an arahant? Of course the monk said, Bhante, you are the Dhamma king. You tell us the answer and we just memorize it. The Buddha said, what is that way? If a monk perceives an object with any of the six senses and is aware of the presence or absence of lust, hatred or delusion internally, then these things that you know, when you see, hear, smell, taste, sense or think of something, and you know that it is accompanied by lust, hatred and delusion, or it is not accompanied by lust, hatred and delusion, then you know this. Is this based on any of these five grounds? Is it based on belief? Is it based on fancy? Is it based on oral tradition? Is it based on theorizing? Is it based on somebody else's theory? No, right? It's a direct personal experience. You don't have to have any faith at all. You know. You cannot deny that there is hatred in you. You cannot deny that there is anger in you. You know. You saw something and you got angry. You know. And the Buddha says, if you know such things are happening within yourself, are these things to be known by faith, fancy, oral tradition, theorizing, considered acceptance of a view? The bhikkhus replied, no. Aren't these things to be known by seeing them with wisdom? Asked the Buddha. Yes, Bhante, answered the bhikkhus. This bhikkhus is the method by which a bhikkhu, apart from faith, fancy, oral tradition, theorizing, considered acceptance of a view, can declare final knowledge. So if you want to become an arahant and you don't want to be dogmatic, very easy. Watch your own mind. Simple. So let's do it before we end. Since you've been sitting so long, and since this can be done in any posture, the Buddha didn't say that you must sit down. He says when you see, hear, smell, taste, or feel anything with your body, or anything happens in your mind, and you know that there's lust, hatred, or delusion, then there's already walking the path. You can do it anytime, not necessarily when you're seated, so please stand up. Try to maintain a good posture, back straight. If you have a good posture, then you won't have aches so fast. Keep your eyes open, because you can practice this anytime. The Buddha says when you see anything and there's lust, hatred and delusion, you know it. And when there's none, also you know it. So keep your eyes open. You don't have to stare at anything in particular. You could just maintain an unfocused gaze. Relax. Or try to relax. If you can't relax, never mind. If you try too hard, you'll get even more tense. And bring your attention to the sense of standing. You can feel your feet, your soles in contact with the floor, your back, propping up your body, the muscles in your legs, your skin in contact with your clothing, with your clothes, with the air around you. Other parts of the body, the muscles, the breathing. You don't have to focus on any single object. Just get a general sense of standing. There are so many sensations, you cannot miss one. While you're trying to be conscious of your body, of the sense of standing, you can also hear someone's coughing. Look at your mind. How is your mind reacting to that cough? You can also be aware that you are seeing, since your eyes are open. And if your mind wanders off, thinking of this and that, don't worry. Don't try to push them away. Don't follow them either. Don't ignore them. Just know. Acknowledge them, let them go by coming back to your senses. Standing, hearing, seeing, perhaps also smelling. Every moment that you are with your senses is a moment of freedom from compulsive thinking. Keep a special lookout for thoughts connected with seeing. You see something, there's a comment that arises in your mind. Know it, acknowledge it, don't follow it, don't push it away. Then come back, be aware of standing, your feet touching the floor, your back propping your body, hearing, many things are happening in your senses. You don't need to notice all of them. But as long as you are with any one of them, at that time, your mind is free from compulsive thinking. Okay, take a seat. That was easy. Not that difficult, right? You can do that anytime. You go for a walk around your park. You take your walk to the MRT. You park your car. You go to the toilet. You can always come back to the senses. Not so difficult. And when you do that and it becomes second nature to you, then it's very easy to see your mind reacting. Because by default, your mind is with the senses. So that is like a reference point. When it's not with the senses, then you know what it's doing. What do you think it's doing? Thinking, right? Thinking about the past, future, worry, commenting. If you make it by default, then you're always trying to be in the present with your senses, then you can catch immediately when your mind goes away. Then you can know whether there's lust, hatred, delusion. This is the first step. Then later on, as you practice more and more, you can see even deeper. Not only was the mind commenting because I saw something, but you commented in a certain way. Why? There's a cause and there's a condition. There's some past conditioning involved. With more practice, you'll be able to see deeper and deeper and understand the nature of cause and conditioning. You can understand how things are impermanent and changing all the time. They are unsatisfactory because you got no control over them and there's no one there. It's all due to cause and conditioning. And if you do that persistently and continuously enough, you can declare final knowledge. Doesn't matter what tradition you belong to.
Shall we put our hands together? Let us thank Venerable Aggacitta for the wonderful sharing. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Questions?
Now is a good time to ask any questions or queries you have.
Good afternoon, Bhante. Thank you for your talk. You mentioned compulsive thinking a few times. I'm not very certain what you meant by compulsive thinking. Can you please elaborate on that one?
I think most of us are living in our heads all the time.
Is the wandering thoughts, is that?
When you walk anywhere, your mind is not with your walking. You're thinking of something, right? Past and future and whatever, or just daydreaming or just commenting on what you see along the road. That is what I mean by compulsive thinking.
I see. Not in the present moment.
Yes.
Thank you.
Being in the present moment means being with your senses.
Thank you.
Bhante, from your talk, I can gather that the core teachings are kept because of the transmission, but some bits might be lost. And that's evident in the fact that there are many traditions there. When the core is what you say, Noble Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truth. Which means that even in all the suttas that we are studying, a lot of them are not on this core. So how much of this is maintained and how much is actually lost? Because suttas is not only this core teaching, so which means that they diluted. Can you just comment on that?
To answer your question, Buddhist scholars have a rule of thumb. And nowadays it's possible for us to study cross-cultural studies, which means that you can study a parallel of a Pali text. You have a Pali, Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese, all parallel, similar sutta. But there are some points which differ. So the rule of thumb is that if there is a common element going through all these four different parallels, then that must be the core teaching. If there are some special ones here and there, that is suspect, that is questionable. That is the rule of thumb. If there is something that is common among all the traditions, that is the core teaching. Other than that, it's questionable.
My second question is related to the thinking. You asked us to watch our senses. So when you say senses, it must be the five senses and not the thinking. Because thinking is also a sense, right?
Right. Correct.
So
yes,
watching the
five senses.
Not the sixth one. Okay, thank you.
You can also watch the sixth sense, but not get involved in the story. Thinking actually happens in the present moment, but the content of the thought may be about the past or the future. So if you're skillful enough, you can actually watch the sixth sense as well. But if you're not skillful, when you try to watch the sixth sense, you get caught up in the story rather than watching the thinking process.
Bhante, I have a question which is a bit off the topic today. You've written a book called Dying to Live. This book basically talks about the dying moment, and it helps people how to achieve a good death, because that is critical, in terms of where you'll be born the next life. Forgive me if I've understood the book wrongly, and please correct me, but in chapter 5 you quoted a monk, and you talked about how he manipulated the dying moment, because there was a dying man. He saw devas coming in chariots and all that, and the monk sort of like negotiated with the deva, don't kill him so quickly. And then he saw a ghost, and he saw...
No. Yeah, let me correct you.
Yes.
He didn't negotiate with the deva. He sort of arrived at a conclusion because the dying man was describing what he saw. When he heard that the dying man was seeing all these visions, then he quickly tried to, as you said, manipulated it by chanting or doing something to change his vision.
Right, okay, so he didn't negotiate, so to speak. Okay, but my question is, the dying man saw several visions, ghosts, his dead parents and devas and all that. Is it okay to manipulate, so to speak, the dying process like this? Is it all right to do that, or should it be natural thing based on your own faith and your karma? I mean, can you artificially manipulate? That's my point.
It's not artificial. It's also an external aid, an external assistance to help a person transit in wholesome and beneficial way. It's a skillful way of helping the person to provide the conditions for him to change his future destiny. In Abhidhamma, if you read that book, you would have known about the 4 types of karma that will ripen according to priority. The first one is heavy karma. The second one is near-death karma. The third one is habitual karma. And the fourth one is some past karma. It's none of the 3, but something else that was done sometime, maybe in a past life. When habitual karma, this number 3, is what this person habitually does, and that will arise in his mind. So if this person is a butcher, for example, then his habitual karma will be killing, and then that will cause him to have visions of maybe being killed, or these animals that he killed coming to take revenge, or some fearful visions, right? So if somebody next who is aware of what this person is seeing through his descriptions, then can do something to create what is called near-death karma, which means he brings some monks in to do some chanting or to distract his attention from all these visions, and then that near-death karma, new karma that he's creating, would then have the power to create new visions, more wholesome visions for him to be reborn in a better destiny. But that doesn't mean that his habitual karma will be obliterated. It's just that it's postponed.
Bhante, I have some questions. Just now you teach us about standing awareness. Can this standing awareness, we do it in walking, sleeping, or standing in all the other positions?
Yes.
Is there any durations for it? 10 minutes of we can practice it?
No, the duration is as long as you can.
But we practice it with eye closed. Because of awareness, mostly I practice it with eye closed. But something very new that is open.
The thing is, when you train your mind to practice with the eyes closed, then you won't know how to practice when the eyes are open. Correct? And most of the time, when you are awake, are your eyes open or closed?
Mostly when you try close, when you close, you have different sensations from when you are open. The awareness is different.
Right.
Yeah.
But with your eyes open, then you train the mind to be aware in all circumstances. And then you can also see more clearly how the mind reacts to what the eye sees. If you train your mind to be mindful only when your eyes are closed, then you don't get all those comments that arise when the eyes are open. And these comments occur very often when your eyes are open. It's just that you don't notice them, because you didn't train your mind to notice them. Okay.
Good afternoon, Bhante. Just now in continuation of the manifestation of karma, if in our past life bad karmas were accumulated and there's no chance of negating it by doing good karma now, in any case, the bad karma is going to manifest. Why should we do dana to accumulate good karma?
You didn't attend my workshop yesterday,
No.
You better ask somebody who attended my workshop. It needs me one day to explain to you.
Okay, thank you.
Bhante, welcome to Singapore. Hope that you come more often. I think in the many references that you said just now, you were mentioning that realization of the Dharma was possible as long as you are aware. The awareness of your delusions, the awareness of your defilements. But surely you want to go the step beyond that. The realization is not enough.
Yes.
The awareness is just not enough.
Correct. Okay.
My question is, how do you really go beyond that?
Please attend my retreat.
Here?
Somewhere.
Okay, I'll do that, Bhante.
We've come to the end of our Q&A session. I'd like to thank Bhante for taking his time off his hectic schedule here in Singapore to attend our Lions Raw service and to share some of his wisdom with us. Let us put our hands together. Shall we say sadhu 3 times to appreciate Bhante's time? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.